folks. Greetings from the Offensive Security Group here at Secure IT 360, coming at you with a new episode of the Cyber Threat Perspective. You've got Spencer and myself, Brad, here to talk about how we are employing AI, artificial intelligence, for those of you that have been under a rock for 5 years, how we're using AI offensively in our day-to-day lives. And so I think the answer might surprise you a little bit, but there's definitely some value there. So, Spencer, do you want to kind of give an intro into, maybe framing the episode just a little bit, and then we'll deep dive into, what that looks like.
We did another episode that was all about how threat actors are using AI, and we did some research for that episode and kind of looked at interesting stories that were happening where we know threat actors are using AI. One of the interesting use cases in that episode was that in some cases there are threat actors that are using AI to kind of like mutate their malware on the endpoint kind of thing. So really cool stuff. There's a lot of potential, and obviously with any new technology, there's a gold rush effect that's happening, right? And there's a lot of scams, and there's a lot of security implications as well to be mindful of. And that's the first kind of point that I think is important to call out is, first and foremost, we have to draw a line somewhere, right? Because when we do pen testing, we get access to client environments, right? For an internal or for an external or web app. Like we get, credentials for a web app, or we might get scoping information that's not necessarily public information. So we have to be mindful of that information, client identifiable information, when we're using these AI tools, these LLMs, chatbots, etc. So I think this is a really interesting discussion, and we're going to talk about kind of some of the ways that we use AI offensively, if you will, at Security 360. I don't think there's going to be any surprises, I think a lot of the use cases are pretty self-explanatory over what you would expect a group of pen testers and hackers to use it for. But maybe there'll be some nuances that you didn't expect. More or less, just to take away from this, if you're a defender, an IT admin, or an IT manager, CIO, or CISO, what you can take away from this is, how are threat actors using AI? How are our attackers using AI against me? What are some of the capabilities that are out there that is speeding up the time or decreasing, I guess, the time it takes to attack your environment, right? Or to attack your organization. So those are some of the key points I think we should hit on.
Absolutely. And I want to open from my perspective by saying, use the right tool for the job, right? And also hashtag know your tools. Okay. So anytime we're diving into this world, we really need to understand what's going on here. Where does this LLM live? Where does the data that we put into it go? And also, probably I would say secondarily, what are its capabilities? Because all models are not created equal. And so any of you that have played around with different models like Grok versus OpenAI versus whatever it is, versus like Olama, for example, those are three dramatically different things. And so, especially if you're writing code, you want to use something like Sonnet. If you're working through English papers, maybe ChatGPT is the way to go. And even within those broad categories, there are submodels that are specifically trained. So I think it really helps for people to understand what we're talking about, because we're not talking about AI generally speaking. We are, but it's nuanced, right? And so there are dedicated offensive models out there. There are dedicated defensive models out there. So you need to understand that, if all you've ever used is ChatGPT, then you're about 3 years behind the curve, is what I would say. And so spend some time understanding what those different models are, what they can do for you, and then how they can be employed safely and securely in your workflow. You mentioned, go ahead.
I was just going to say, one of the interesting things that I don't think we mentioned it in the last episode on AI, but something that has come out recently, I guess in the last few months, I think, was ChatGPT. When you share, you can actually share chat history or chats from ChatGPT. Those were indexed, and maybe still are. Those are indexed by Google, and you can search for them using Google Foo.
Yeah.
So if you were inadvertently sharing things, that you didn't want people to know or to see, that's just like one of the nuances to be mindful of, right?
Yeah. And there's a lot of those. And I would even kind of add to that unless you are controlling the environment that model's running in, you don't have a clue. Right. And so yes, you can buy dedicated instances. We're actually partnered with a couple of clients right now who are implementing like their own dedicated instance of OpenAI in their corporate environment. And you can buy those things. But if you got the $30 a month subscription service to ChatGPT, that data is just going to go wherever they want it to go, right? And so you don't have a ton of control over that. So again, what we're talking about today is how we're using it. And so for me, that's the beginning of the delineation, right? I'm not putting client data in anything that I don't explicitly control. And so, I was actually working yesterday with an offline model, building that into some security tooling that we have. And so I'm comfortable with that. Right. I understand how it works. I own the system that it's running in. And so like, fine, I don't mind funneling like vulnerability data or IP addresses and stuff like that through that. But we have to explicitly notify the client of that, right? Like, hey, we're using this model. This is where it lives. Your data lives here. So like think about it like any other system that you would build. I think a lot of people think AI is this like magical new thing. Yeah, it's cool. It's still a web app, right? It's still a service running on a server somewhere, and it's still owned and controlled in the cloud by somebody who's trying to make money. So this is just Google 2.0, right? And I've heard that's not my phrase. I stole that from smart people, but AI is just Google 2.0. That's really all it is. And so, there's some cool capabilities there, but we should be thinking about it in the traditional context from a security perspective of it's just a web app, dude. If you're shoving your data up in this cloud hosted web app, you need to understand how that works, So what are you using AI for?
So tools, exploits, POCs, scripts, etc. is what I have in my notes here of like the most obvious use case, right?
Yep.
Is for me, and I'll give a couple stories of this or examples. On internal pen tests, right? Maybe I have some obscure permission on an Active Directory object that I want to look up, right? Or refer to more detailed documentation on, right? I can use Google and I can go to like Microsoft's documentation on that. Maybe it's kind of light. But what's great about AI that you don't get from Google or even from the documentation itself are like examples and use cases. So you can be like, what is this GP link or GP options permission, and like how could it potentially be abused? Like, is this directly exploitable? Can you give me an example of where this would be directly exploitable and like what tools I would use to abuse this thing? Now, I already know the answer to some of those things, right? Because, of what I do, internal pen testing. But it's really helpful in those situations where you want to learn something, dig into a topic, dig into some nuanced thing, create a POC along the way, or create some sort of script or tool to verify if that vulnerability even exists. So for me personally, it's like very nuanced things. It is things that I'm seeing on internal pen tests where I want to dig in deeper into the abuse cases of that, where particularly things that I haven't seen before or I haven't seen in a while. That is where it's super helpful to me. And I'll give one story about creating an exploit. So this was, I want to say 2023, maybe, when ChatGPT kind of first came out.
Wow, old school, man.
I was doing an internal pen test, and there was a vulnerable version of Splashtop Streamer software on the endpoint. So Splashtop is it's another RMM tool like TeamViewer, right? So there was a vulnerable version of Splashtop Streamer. There was a CVE for it. I looked it up. It was found by somebody at Mandiant. It was like all reported, like all legitimate and everything. And the information about how the vulnerability worked was on GitHub. There was no exploit code. There was no POC already available for it, but the vulnerability description essentially described the vulnerability. So I was able to reverse engineer that vulnerability, and then I was able to create an exploit in a language that I had traditionally not really written any code in, which was C++. I'd done some in college, so I was familiar with the language to some extent,
Mm-hmm.
but I would not have been able to create a C++ exploit by myself without the support of ChatGPT in that instance.
Yep.
So I told it the parameters, I told it what I needed it to do. And in about an hour of like troubleshooting and like copying and pasting error messages and stuff like that, I had a working exploit in C++, a language I don't, know or use, and it worked and it was successful. Right? Now I wrote the same thing in PowerShell in like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Right? But the point I'm making is you can give these LLMs, these AI platforms, the parameters you're looking for, and especially now, like that was 3 years ago or so. Now, like it's even better to just tell it the parameters and have it whip up an exploit, and it can even give you an exploit in multiple different languages.
Yeah.
It can give you, an obfuscated version in some cases, and like a lot of things in seconds or minutes, where it would take you, hours of reverse engineering and development time. So POCs, scripts, like one-off tools, super, super, super good for that.
Yeah, I agree. And so when you're talking about small projects, I feel like most of the models are pretty okay at that, right?
Yeah.
If it's like, hey, write me a script that automates a zap scan, or, I don't know, I'm just making stuff up, but, you can do something like that relatively simply. When you start getting into multiple moving parts and creating, services that interact with sites and APIs, like it starts to get a little kind of dumb. Right. And
Yep.
so I think I explained this to somebody yesterday. Is like, the models that we have today are like a really smart 7-year-old. Right. If you give them like really good instruction, they can probably put the square thing in the square hole. But beyond that, they have no idea what's going on. And so the other thing that I want to mention too, to your point, is you used ChatGPT for that several years ago. You probably couldn't use ChatGPT for that now, because their guardrails have improved. And so, in fact, going from 4.0 to 5.0 destroyed a lot of things that I had going in OpenAI. And so I canceled my subscription with them. Now I'm using Grok. Grok has fewer guardrails so that I can do the thing. I mean, let's be real. What we do is very close to what bad guys do. So I understand the hesitation of and the security mechanisms around that. But the reason that I bring that story up is this is an evolving thing. It's constantly changing. So what you're doing today may not work next week, and you need to be able to pivot. And so if you are relying on these tools for stuff like that, as they evolve, so must you. And so, that's just a really important thing to take away from this, is that, like, don't invest everything into one model. So now my turn for some cool stories, right? As you guys know, like my kind of near and dear to my heart is web app pen testing. This is actually a story from yesterday/today. And so Jordan's doing a web app pen test. And a big portion of this web app pen test is file uploads of like images and PDFs and documents and stuff like that, right? And so we pen tested this application over multiple years, and it's continually getting better. And so that means we have to continually get better as well at, bypassing whatever controls they have. And so one of the controls that they have is with regards to file upload and the application type, like the MIME types. And so we basically went to Grok and we were like, all right, cool, give me a list of all of them. And then let's prioritize that list based on ones that are dangerous.
Yep.
So like text/ASP or application/octet stream or whatever those might be. And then we flip over to burp proxy and we fuzz with that list, right? And so again, very important thing, we don't put client data in anything ever. And so this was, just like, okay, cool, give me a list of these things. So it is helpful in that regard. Now, could I have found those things online and figured that out myself in 20 or 30 minutes? Probably. This took me 45 seconds.
Yep.
And so, that's really for me where the value is. Like, none of these things are doing stuff that I'm incapable of doing, but they are streamlining the process and accelerating the process that I can do these things. That's the value from my perspective.
Yep.
Similarly, we were doing, I don't remember why, it was a couple of weeks ago, we were doing a binary analysis. And so because we can't put that online because the binary, like the actual code belongs to the client or whatever, we just spun up an offline model that we control, and we just fed the source code through it. And then we also loaded it up and used IDA Pro to analyze the actual application as it's running. We fed all that data through, and what we ended up finding was a console takeover vulnerability in the application. Could we have found that by manually reviewing the source code? Absolutely. Would it have taken 3 days? Probably. In this case, half an hour, 2 hours, whatever it is. So there are some opportunities for economy there, even if it's just quickly closing out research. Like, what are some other file upload vulnerabilities that I can check into? This particular app works this way, and so you can ask questions of it to speed things up a little bit. But what I will tell you is this: at today's stage, AI is not going to be smarter than you. It's just a faster research method. You have to verify it because it will give you wrong information. In fact, I would even say it's wrong more than it's right. You have to be smart enough to understand the difference. And if you're not, you're just going to get lost in the sauce, man. Okay. Do you want to talk about the app locker thing?
Yeah, just a quick story about app locker is so I was on another internal pen test, right? And there was a whole bunch of app locker rules. They had like 100 or more rules in their app locker policy. And some of them were misconfigured. They had wildcard paths and they had, file shares that I could, I had modify rights to. So I could drop binaries in there and run them, scripts, etc. So I was like, what? I don't want to review all 150 rules in this app locker policy myself. Yep. So I was like, hey, ChatGPT, write me a PowerShell script to analyze all these rules. And I was like, cool, bro, I got you. And it actually spit out something that was quite amazing. It went above and beyond, and it created a framework for analyzing these rules. And it even created categories for the different misconfigurations that you could have within an app locker policy by itself. And then with some prompting back and forth, I was able to create a really slick, very bare bones app locker evaluation tool, rule evaluation tool, essentially, to evaluate app locker policies. And then my buddy Michael Hagg created a HTML report front end for it, which made it even awesomer. And then I
love it, dude.
Within an hour, I had this super comprehensive app locker policy evaluation tool. And a large part of that was because ChatGPT did the heavy lifting for me to create a rule analytic engine, right? Yeah. It looked at, modifiable paths and wildcard paths, and it built all of the logic for this rule engine. And then I just had to duct tape it together, put a front end on it, a nice report, and then it was amazing.
Is it on your GitHub yet?
Yes, it is. It's called.
Oh, there it is. Beautiful, dude. Yeah, man. I love that.
So super cool in situations like that. Now, I will say though, PowerShell, I feel is very easy, and ChatGPT and Claude and the other ones handle it pretty well. But to your point, when you get into large projects, multiple modules and features and the stuff that you're working on internally, it just does break. It hallucinates things. So there's a very, there's a very finite use case for things like that.
Yeah, and you really have to vet this code, man. I cannot stress that enough. If you think you're going to go into Sonnet or Claude and be like, yo, write me this super wicked cool tool, you better go through every line of that source code.
One of the funny things that I noticed with ChatGPT is it likes to minify the code. It likes to be super efficient with the number of lines.
Yes.
So it would put if statements and for loops and everything on one line. And I'm like, what kind of a psycho writes an if statement on one line? Yeah. And so funny stuff like that. It just, it'll make up PowerShell commandlets that don't exist and things like that.
Yep. So, I've had that happen before. It will forget things you just talked about 2 prompts ago. That's my biggest pet peeve, man, because right now I think, hold on, I'll tell you exactly what I'm working with. I'm working with Claude 4.5 Sonnet.
Yeah.
And one of the projects that I'm working on right now is large scale DAST scanning for web applications, right? And so OWASP Zap is an amazing open source project. And one of the things that I really love about it is it natively can be built as a service, which means you can feed it URLs, and it has like an Ajax browser and like some really neat features. And so if you're not familiar with Zap, I encourage you to check it out if you're in the AppSec space. But what I was trying to do was have, Claude build me like, I just want to do a pool of Zap services, like each one listing on a different port. And that way I can feed the pool the URLs, and then, the result will be, whatever the output of Zap is, which I think is like JSON by default. And so, but the problem is, again, it tries to get super creative and do things I didn't ask it to do. And it created a 30-second timeout for scans. Mm-hmm. And it's like, bro, what web app are we scanning in 30 seconds? So like it would just continuously fail. And so I had to go back and dig through the pool manager to identify where is this timeout that you're creating arbitrarily. And so I tell you that story to say, we're not even talking about something super complex. We're talking about 50 lines of Python code to just manage a pool of Zap services. And it was falling apart, dude. It was just like, yeah, we want it to go quick. And I was like, who said that? That was never one of my requirements, And so it does hallucinate requirements. And like you said, I've had it hallucinate like import statements.
Yep.
Like what is import Zap pool manager in Python, bro? That's not a thing. Where did you come up with that? So keep an eye on it. Again, you need to know what you're doing. And I go back to my analogy of a really smart 7-year-old, right? Does that mean they don't need supervision? Yeah, they still do, right? We still have to check them and make sure they're doing the right thing.
Yep.
So yeah, just real quick, admin. We do pen testing here at Secure IT 360. In fact, that's all we do in the offensive security group is pen testing. Now, Secure IT 360 has other groups, but that's what we do. And so if there's a need for that, if you guys need pen testing, let us know. We'd love to have the opportunity to work with you to talk about that. You can get a hold of us at offsec.blog/pen testing, fill out a form, and we'll be in touch super quick. So yeah, that's my, shameless pitch of the day. So let's move to the next one. Detailed finding language. This is actually awesome. Yeah. By the way, this is something I'm a huge fan of, and I think it's a great fit for this episode. So what are you doing with, I would just say, English language with regards to AI?
Yeah. So one of the biggest lifts for us is reporting. Right. Mm-hmm. It's, coming up with finding description language and supporting, context and things like that related to a vulnerability or a finding or a misconfiguration. Right. Mm-hmm. So we have a large template issue library, if you will, already. It has a number of vulnerabilities and findings and misconfigurations in it. But when we come across the chance to either update a finding or improve it, if we need to add to it, or if we just need to create a net new finding, like if there's just a new vulnerability that we come across and we're like, oh, we don't have a template for this, like we don't have an issue in our reporting platform already, this is really great for that. And the way I kind of like to handle it is I give it a prompt, and I have a prompt in the notes. I won't read it all, but it's essentially like write a professional vulnerability description that is on the topic of whatever, right? But the important thing for us, at least for me, is I will give it the template of an issue, right? So the title, the CVSS score, the description, the solution, the remediation section, retesting, the references. So I'll give it like the template, and I'll say, create, a professional vulnerability description for XYZ topic. Yep. And then I'll also give it reference material, right? So I'll give it a link to MITRE ATT&CK's website that talks about that technique, or I'll give it a link to a blog post that I wrote, or some content that I have on that topic, right? Or some other third-party information. Like if it's some new vulnerability like bad successor or the WSUS thing, be able to give it an article and say, hey, use this information, all the details about the vulnerability, and include it in the finding, right, that you create for me.
Yep.
And then inevitably it will make stuff up, it'll hallucinate. So that's where, again, the human element comes in, is like modifying it, editing it, making sure that it's accurate and clear. Yep. I've never been able to just straight copy and paste a finding from ChatGPT to the report play. There's so much nuance to it that it just doesn't make sense. But it's great at that first pass, right? It's great to give you, especially if you like writer's block and you're like doing 100 different things and you're like, I got to make this finding. Like, I don't even know what to write. And then it's great to clear that kind of writer's block. And you're like, oh yeah, that impacts this thing over here. And then like you modify it. So that's kind of my general high level kind of workflow for creating new finding language for reports.
Yeah. And first of all, I think it's amazing for that, right? And it'll get you 80% there. That's probably what I would say, right? You're going to have to clean it up, tweak it, whatever. But what I have found similarly is that it doesn't understand the nuance of pen testing, like you said, right? Especially if you're using like an offline model. I was playing with Olama 3.2 yesterday, trying to generate like automated reports from those DAS scans that I was just describing. And there is an SSL breach attack, browser reconnaissance and exfiltration, blah, 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 whatever, right? It's usually a false positive, but sometimes it will show up in findings. And so when when Olama got a hold of it, it was like, you've been breached, and it like wrote me this huge paragraph about how horrible this entire scan was, and how like your company's going to die and burn. And it's like, one, it's a false positive. Two, it's like a low risk finding, but because it had the word breach in it, the language model just flipped out, and it was just like, oh wow, this is terrible, hacked. You've been hacked. And I was like, bro, calm down. So yeah, understanding that these things, again, that they are analyzing and interpreting based on their training, right? And they are very likely not trained on pen testing findings. And so there is some nuance to that. Now, are there other models out there? Yes, there are millions of models. Some of them are really good at writing vulnerability, findings and reports. But again, that's why I say, when we start talking about leveraging AI in a professional environment, we're not talking about ChatGPT. We're not talking about Grok. We're not talking about Sonnet. We're specifically talking about all of the different models that are out there. You have to do your research and figure out which ones work, and they're only going to be as good as your prompt. So just like what I used to tell people when they were first getting into the pen test world, the skill of finding what you need on Google is one of the most important skills you're ever going to have. And so, if you don't know how to look up stuff with the right keywords and the right structure of the request in the Google search parameter, then you're not going to find anything. And this skill carries directly over. It's a different skill set, but in a similar vein, you have to understand how to use AI, and when not to. By the way, is just as important.
Yep.
So yeah, all really good stuff, man. You got another thing. A couple of things here. And by the way, I like the one that you have highlighted right now on the show notes.
Yeah.
That is one that I use very frequently. So let's talk about that one real quick.
Yeah. The other part of like this finding thing of like creating language for reports is when we do pen testing, we do these reports, we like to give as much information as possible, including how to actually fix the thing and to how to retest it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So an example might be, there's a misconfigured group policy, or there's a group policy that has misconfigured permissions, right? ChatGPT, Claude, all these AI platforms, right, can just give you step-by-step instructions to reproduce an issue, to give you step-by-step instructions of where to go to fix the things. Now, obviously, you, to our point earlier, you have to know enough to know when it's wrong or what steps are inaccurate and stuff like that. But at least gives you that step-by-step guide so that you can go and validate it yourself and make sure that it's accurate. But that is a tremendous heavy lift of, when I'm doing an internal, I'm like, I know how to do this, right? You open up group policy, you right click, you click on the security tab, you go to permissions. Like, it takes a while to write that out, right?
Yep.
And if I can have an LLM just write it out for me in like 30 seconds, and it's like complete and it's mostly accurate, and I just have to change a few things or change the formatting and stuff, it's like, that is a huge time saver.
It is.
So the retesting, or sorry, the remediation steps and documenting that is super, super helpful.
It is, yeah. And so similar thing happened literally this week. We were working with a client who had like it was some kind of custom web service that was running on an Apache box or something like that. And he was like, I can't figure out how to add security headers to this thing. And so the first thing I did is I go out to this website of the product and I pull up the user's manual, and it's like 1,500 pages, and I start to search through it. And I'm like, wait a minute, hold on. And so I go over to Grok and I'm like, yo, dude, what are the steps to add security headers to this thing? And it's 20 seconds later, and we tested it live on the conference call with the client. We're like, hey, open up the web portal, go here, go there, click on this, open this thing up, and see if you can add them there. And he's like, oh yeah, that worked perfectly. And I'm like, there we go, dude. So there's some value. Again, rapid research is one of the strong suits of these tools. And so, could I have found that? Yeah, eventually. It would have taken me 20 or 30 minutes, and I did it in 20 or 30 seconds. So, the vast majority of this is really just is helping us find economies in our day-to-day lives, right? And there's a lot of opportunity for that. There's also some creativity aspects to this, right? So, like, if I don't know, you've got listed here podcast ideas, outlines, and notes. It's really good for wireframing an episode. Like, hey, I want to do an episode on IIS and why it's the worst, web service in the world. Not that it is, by the way, but if I did, I could have it spit out an outline to a podcast and then try to figure out like what makes sense, what doesn't. So the creativity aspect is really nice.
Yep. Yeah. Just thinking through ideas is super helpful. Like thinking about, what are the top 3 things that I'm missing in this outline, right? If I create a podcast outline, I'm like, I have this outline for this topic. What would be something super valuable or impactful or important to mention that I didn't already include in this?
Yep.
Or what are the things I should not talk about? What are the things that are irrelevant? A lot of times when I'm doing podcasts and content and webinars, I'm helping think through the thought process of the other person on the other end. So if I'm talking about insecure permissions in Active Directory, maybe I give it an outline. I say, what are the things that I'm assuming based on this outline that somebody else might not understand, right? Or what would be the things that would be confusing for somebody in this content that I have made, so that I can address those in the content up front and not just assume that because I know it, somebody else knows it, or that because I understand a thing that somebody else does. So it's really helpful for thinking through ideas and in writing more clearly. Writing at like a certain grade level is super helpful too. If like you give it a blog post and you find you use a lot of big words or something, tell it to rewrite it in like a 5th grade reading level. And you'll see like how different the language can be.
I bet you do that when you send me emails. You're like, write this at a 5th grade reading level so Brad can understand it. And dude, it works, man. I get it. If you get up to 7th or 8th grade, you're going to lose me, bro. But exactly. No, I completely agree, man. It's good for rewriting emails too. Like if you want to have a certain tone with an email, and we're so accustomed internally here at Secure IT 360 of like we just kind of blunt with regards to our communications. Like, actually, that's terrible, and here's why. But you can't say that in a client email, right? And so, it can help you with that. I haven't really used it for that very much, but I know a lot of people that do, and they seem to find success with it, and I have no problem with that. So yeah, and here's my favorite thing to do from a creativity perspective. Like, hey, I'm going to do a podcast. I'm going to do a webinar. I want to write a white paper. Ask me questions and let's formulate a plan together on how to approach this. So in fact, 2 weeks ago, we have a hack the box, not a hack the box. We have that too, but in Huntsville, Alabama, we have a DEF CON chapter. And so I wanted to do a hacking juice shop, like a talk, like a 90-minute demonstration on how to do like IDOR, cross-site scripting, SQL injection, and teach people the basic fundamentals of web application security testing. Yep. And so, I spent a reasonable amount of time in Grok building like, hey, what do you think would be the easiest types of exploits for people to understand, right? IDOR is a really easy one. Like, oh, I changed the 1 to a 2, boom. And so I kind of leverage that to be like, all right, write this so that somebody who's never seen Zap or Burp before can get into this and have a good time. And it was a huge success, man. Everybody had a great time. So there are some value there. Again, think about it like an assistant, maybe. Yep. Somebody you can bounce ideas off of.
You did an episode a while back, maybe it was a year ago or more, right? That you had, I think it was ChatGPT.
Yeah, they interviewed me.
You on like,
Yeah.
that pen testing or something.
Yeah, I do remember that. I kind of want to do it again because I
Yeah.
want to see how the difference, because, just from my perspective, the quality of the questions were not really there.
Yep.
They were super high level. I
Yep.
kind of want to go back and do that again and see what that looks like.
Yep.
And then do like a compare and contrast kind of thing. So
That's one of
yeah.
my favorite techniques for this is, and I mentioned it on the PDQ live that I did last week with those guys is, they asked like some of the ways I use AI. And that was one of the ways I mentioned was like, when you're making, particularly in the content sense of things or writing findings or speaking to other people, I find it helpful to ask the AI to ask me questions as if they were an IT admin, right?
Yep.
So imagine you're in a debrief meeting, right? And you're talking about a finding and then the IT person is like, well, what does that actually mean? Or what is the actual risk of that? Or can I do this? Or can I mitigate it with that? If you ask ChatGPT or Grok or whatever, like think like an IT admin in this setting and ask me questions like they would ask, and actually help you prepare for those meetings, help you think through the content or the topic better, if you will.
Yeah.
So I like that approach of like having it ask you questions.
That's really smart. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. So yeah, maybe we'll have a guest on soon that's an AI model and be like, what do you want to talk about? Just kind of let them run with
Yeah.
it. I don't know. It might be
Be fun to
interesting.
compare.
Yeah. All right, folks. That's all we have time for today. Thank you for listening and or watching, depending on what platform you're on. If you enjoyed this episode and you want to hear more like it, please like, subscribe, share with your network. And more importantly, reach out to us, man. Let us know if you like this kind of content. If you don't, that's totally cool too. Or if there's a specific thing you'd like to hear us talk about, reach out to us at offsec.blog. And we would love to have that conversation, with the team. So, all right, folks, we'll see you next week.